Hey everyone, my name's Dom, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a review for you and it's going to be Among Thieves by MJ Kuhn. So that's what's coming up next. Among Thieves is released on the 9th of September. It's an adult fantasy heist novel and it's touted as being for fans of Six of Crows, presumably at least because that's the current big thing as far as heist fantasy goes, thanks to the Netflix adaptation. The storyline is quite simple. A thief with a quick wit and an even quicker tongue takes on a job to steal a precious artifact from an impenetrable island fortress. To complete this job, she pulls together a gang of criminals who all have their own motivations for getting involved, which undoubtedly will lead to bickering and differences amongst her crew and potentially a bit of betrayal along the way. So nice and straightforward, and as I said in my TBR video when I mentioned that I was going to be reading this title, I was hoping for something less Six of Crows and more The Lies of Locke Lamora, where you've got a nice complex heist and some tense action and some great interactions between the crew. So let's start off with world building. And first of all, this is a world with magic in it. There's a couple of different types of magic, or at least a couple of different types of magic users. So we have this island where this precious artifact, the object of the heist, is located, and the island is run by the Guildmaster. So in this particular world you've got 5 kingdoms, and they are all kind of overseen by the Guildmaster. He keeps the individual kings and queens in line basically. Under the Guildmaster, he has disciples and he has adepts. So you've got 2 different types, you've got kinetics and you've got sensors, and together they are called adepts, and they are adept from birth. They are born with these powers, and the Guildmaster basically kind of collects all of these young adepts as soon as they start displaying powers, or as soon as it becomes apparent that they are either a sensor or a kinetic, and he brings them to his island for training. So in terms of the adept, the kinetics have kinetic abilities and they can move things with their mind. They can bind people, stop them running away for instance, they can move objects and so forth. The sensors are kind of limited, they can sense danger, but you get the impression through this book that this isn't generally well known exactly kind of how it works or what they can and can't do. Ultimately though, they can sense danger, or they can sense the intent of danger. So if somebody is lurking around the corner with a knife, the sensor will kind of be able to smell this on the air and therefore be able to take steps to avoid it. Also on the Guildmaster's Island you have disciples, and disciples are basically the best of the adept. So they are almost the captains of the adept if you like, the strongest, most powerful of them. And essentially from this group of disciples, the next Guildmaster, when the current Guildmaster dies, the next Guildmaster will be raised from this group. So the Guildmaster himself therefore is also a very, very powerful adept. We really see 2 parts of this world. So we see the Guildmaster's Island because that's where the main part of the heist takes place, of course. And outside of that, we see the lottery, which is a part of a particular kingdom where our characters live. And it's kind of the bad side of town, really. Nobody goes there unless they are down on their luck. This is a place that's really controlled by the gangs, and there's gang warfare pretty much between them. There's always little skirmishes, always little jobs going against each other and so forth. And anyone in one gang will take the opportunity to slit another gang member's throat if they feel they can get away with it at any given time. So we see a bit of the geography, but it is really very much condensed into those little areas. Beyond that, we hear little snippets of other kingdoms and how they interact with each other, the kind of the politics of it and so forth. We also learn a bit of the history of these kingdoms and how they came to be in their current situation, where there's the 5 kingdoms that are ruled by a Guildmaster. So we learn about kind of how this came about and a little bit about what keeps it in check at the moment, which is basically the Guildmaster supplying adepts. People outside of essentially the Guildmaster's Island can buy these adepts from the Guildmaster, but because it's not disciples that are up for sale, it's always the weaker of the adept, the ones that aren't quite good enough to be part of the Guildmaster's kind of inner circle almost. This is the sort of story where the characters should be one of the main kind of driving points of it. For me, it should be characters and the heist itself, which I'll come to when I talk about the plot of the story. But in terms of the characters, I felt that they're just There wasn't enough to them. We do have a reasonable group, and we've got, I think, 5 different main point of view characters who are all part of this gang, basically, that's put together to go and complete this heist. We start out with the Butcher of Carrowick, who is a thief called Rhea. She is basically kind of this almost mysterious thief. She kind of moves around a little bit until she outstays her welcome, and then she moves on to a new place. Kind of get the impression she becomes a legend there and then moves on to the next place, becomes a legend, and so forth. So it's all kind of a bit maybe convenient, I guess, but you know, we're living in the present in this story. We're not fed sort of flashbacks or anything like that. We're not seeing too much of the past of these characters. Rhea is basically famous for carrying around hatchets, the kind of a legend of the Butcher of Carrowick. People know about these hatchets that she has, but they don't actually know that she is female, so generally speaking, it's always the Butcher of Carrowick is a he. They know the name, they know the kind of the MO, the wielding of these hatchets, but they know literally nothing else about her, indeed, thinking that the Butcher is a he. Outside of that, we've got a sailor, kind of a almost a pirate queen, I guess, is the kind of the way that she's portrayed, or the way that she portrays herself. We've got the leader of one of the gangs who doesn't really have point of view in this story. There's one particular chapter which is from his point of view, but I can't actually remember any prior to that or any outside of that chapter. We also have a guard captain, we've got a master of kind of costume and disguise, and we've got a young thief who's kind of a master of sleight of hand. So obviously these are the characters who are going to be involved in the heist. I don't think it's a spoiler for me to say so, because for me at least it is fairly obvious that when they are introduced in the story, it's because they are going to be taking part in the heist element of the story later on. Now for the characters themselves, I've got 2 kind of main issues. One of them is a personal thing and one of them is more of a criticism, if you like, of the story. So the main issue that I have with them is that they just don't really have enough backstory. I'm kind of overlapping a bit with talk of the plot. As I say, we know these characters are going to be involved in the actual heist, and in the kind of the introduction, the summary that's on the back of the book, for instance, we are told that each of these characters is going to have their own motive for going on the heist, and there's going to be betrayals and infighting amongst them and so forth. And we are introduced to that in the story. So for most of the characters, we're kind of given a little bit of backstory that tells us what this kind of motivation is going to be and why it might conflict with other members of the crew. So we start to meet these characters and get to know what their kind of skills are and what they're going to bring essentially to the heist. And then when news of the heist comes along, when the job's laid on the table and Rhea starts to put a gang together to complete this heist, obviously we know who it is who's going to be brought into this gang. And it's kind of around this point that we start to see these little bits of backstory come out which tell us what the individual motivations are. So it was all kind of a little bit convenient for me. There was no build up. We don't learn about these things in a kind of natural way early on in the story or anything along those lines. It's pretty much, here's a character we already know, they're going to get involved in a heist. Oh yeah, and before we do that, here's a bit of information about why they're going to say yes and what they're going to be trying to do to turn this to their own gain. So I wasn't really a big fan of the way that was worked into the story. The other issue that I've got with the characters is a completely personal one, which the large majority of people, I would say, are not going to have a problem with. But when I'm reading fantasy, I like to really get lost in the world, and one of the things that I don't like is things which kind of relate to our world, and one of those is names. I see this in quite a lot of fantasy, so it really is just a personal thing. It's not a criticism of the author or anything like that. It's just a personal preference for myself. But the names of these characters kind of really bugged me, because we've got characters called Evelyn, Claudia, Callum, Declan, and it just doesn't sound right to me to have names like these in a fantasy setting, but that's just me. On to the plot then, and this was a little bit disappointing for me, if I'm honest. We're talking about essentially an impossible heist, a heist on an impenetrable island, and it's the Guildmaster's island, so he's kind of the most powerful person in the world, so this should give us some real high stakes and some real intensity, and I don't think that really came across for me in the story, so there was a bit of a missed opportunity there. In terms of comparisons, I said that I was hoping that this would be a bit like Loch Lamora in the inventiveness of the heist itself, the way that they overcame obstacles and so forth. But to be honest, it was kind of a bit more, we're going on a bear hunt. That's kind of what it put me in mind of. For me, a good heist would involve lots of clever thinking, lots of planning in advance, testing perhaps, going through and putting everything together, your crew, your materials, everything that you need, really planning it out into the finite detail, and then the gang having an idea of what might go wrong with this heist and this plan, and what they can do to get around those things. For me though, with Among Thieves, there wasn't really much of that. There wasn't much planning. It was all kind of on the fly, really. And it was just a case of, oh, here's an obstacle in our way. What should we do to get around it? Let's do this. So it was kind of a letdown and a missed opportunity for me. So as I said, the heist is basically the main part of the story. Certainly as far as the plot goes, it is the biggest part of the story, and it should really come away with kind of an air-punching kind of moment of, yes, come on, we've done it, we've got through all this, we've had these real setbacks, we've got over them, and we've come out of it at the end and we've got our prize. That's basically how heist stories go for me. Obviously you do get the ones on the other side where the heist all goes wrong and they fail, and it's more the heroes of the story or the law enforcers or whoever who foil or stop the heist or who catch the gang who are pulling off the heist. But in the main for me, it's a successful heist, and it's going to really twist and turn and take you down paths that you weren't expecting to go down, and that is for me kind of the joy and the beauty of heists. For this one though, the heist quite frankly was a bit, it didn't really do it. There wasn't really any high stakes for me. There were a couple of little moments where, you know, you've always got your betrayals and your things which jump into the path that you're not expecting, and they just didn't work for me. There was nothing really to them that made me really feel for the characters and to wish them success in it. And part of that does go back to the characters, I guess, where we don't have that kind of real meat on the bones, so I wasn't able to get really invested with the characters, and by extension perhaps I wasn't able to get invested in the heist that they were attempting to pull off. So in terms of overall scoring for the book then, it was a fun book. It read well, it was enjoyable, it just didn't quite hit the heights that I wanted it to hit. So enjoyment wise for me it was 15 out of 20. It was good, but it wasn't great. It could definitely have been better, and I really wanted it to be better. The world building is also 15 for me. It was pretty decent, and the bits of the world that we did see, although they were very kind of focused on one particular area, or I guess two particular areas, but we really didn't see a vast amount of the world. But I did like the bits of history that we saw and the way that it was built in terms of the magic and the way that the Guildmaster controlled the magic and so forth. So that I thought was a plus point, and a bit more work on the actual physical world itself would have really helped here, I think. On the other hand, where we didn't see much of it, that kind of detail wasn't necessarily needed. Therefore, it's a score of 15 out of 20 rather than perhaps something a bit lower. The characters for me were only a 14 out of 20. They were okay, but as I said, they needed a bit more depth to them. They were a bit of a letdown for me because they could have really taken the story to the next level if I had that depth, and if I was really able to get into the heads of the characters and really start to kind of feel for them and want them to come out on top. The plot was a 15 out of 20. Although I was let down by the actual heist element itself and some of those earlier things that I spoke about, it was okay as a story overall. I did like some of the little bits that you got in the middle as to why these people were kind of going on the heist and what they were going to do, and why to try and turn it to their own gain. If there was a bit more to that, then this score could have been higher, but because it wasn't looked into enough, and it wasn't looked into for me at the right time, it's just a 15 out of 20. The writing style, 7 out of 10. It was fine. There was no real problem with it. Everything, as I said, read quite smoothly. It was quite well actually written. It was just some of the individual elements that let it down, which fall under other categories in the scoring mechanism. The pace was a 4 out of 5, so a really good score there. It was well paced, it wasn't too fast. At times it almost got a little bit close to being too fast, but it definitely didn't have those kind of real slower parts that made the book drag. So overall, really well paced, and although a small element, it was one of the real kind of highlight elements for me. For my discretionary category, there's not really a lot to go on here. Certainly the review copy I had, there was no map involved, and I think that would have been quite nice to see. There was no kind of extras with this book. It does have a nice cover, I quite like that, but nothing really to sort of go out and sing about. So just a lowly 1 out of 5 for me on this one. Overall then, that comes out as 71%, which is not a bad score. It's definitely what I would say middle of the road though, and it pulls out at equal 44th on my Hall of Fame of all the books that I've scored under this mechanism. In terms of a style rating, that's a 3 out of 5 for me. So again, middle of the road. It was good, it wasn't great, but I don't feel like it was a flat 3. I think it was definitely a 3.5 for me. Just missing out on those extra little bits that could have taken it the extra step, given it a 4-star rating, and made me call it a good book, a really good read that I'm going to recommend. Instead, it's a 3.5. It was okay, but it's not anything earth-shattering. It's not go shout it from the rooftops. It's not quite middle of the road. It's just a little bit past middle of the road, but it's past it on the correct side at least. It's not fallen short of middle of the road. So that's got to be a good point really, hasn't it? So there we go, that's Among Thieves by MJ Kuhn, released on the 9th of September. Go check it out if this sounds like your type of read. It didn't work for me as well as it could do, but it's definitely going to work better for some other people who are more attuned to this type of story, these type of characters, and of course people who are quite frankly a bit less picky than I am. So drop me a note in the comments down below if you've read this or if you're looking forward to reading this. I want to know what your thoughts are. If you haven't already done so, give the video a thumbs up if you liked what I've had to say. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. I'll see you in another video soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books, and I'll catch you later.